The sun was just beginning to pierce the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the sprawling Fort Bragg training grounds. Mist clung to the fields, curling around the boots of cadets lined up in neat rows. Their faces were a mixture of excitement and arrogance, the kind of youthful confidence that comes from never having faced a real test. Some adjusted their uniform collars, smoothed down their polished boots, and whispered among themselves, already sizing each other up, already trying to assert dominance in a hierarchy that hadn't fully formed yet. And then she arrived. Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne stepped onto the field with a measured grace that immediately drew the cadets' attention. Her uniform was pristine, each insignia gleaming under the early sun, her boots scuff-free and impeccably shined. Her hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back into a tight bun, revealing a face lined not with age but with experience. Every wrinkle told a story of battles fought, exercises survived, and soldiers shaped. She moved with a quiet authority, a presence that seemed to command the air itself. Whispers started almost immediately. "Who is that?" one cadet asked, voice tinged with mockery. "She looks like she's in her 40s, maybe even 50s. A younger cadet snorted. "Maybe she's here to show us how to do knitting circles or morning stretches." Laughter rippled through the line. A few cadets elbowed each other, pointing at her, smirking. They were certain she was a relic of the past, a woman whose time had long passed. Rebecca's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over the formation. She didn't flinch at the laughter, she didn't even acknowledge it. Her gaze settled briefly on the tallest cadet, a young man with a permanent sneer, and she made a mental note. By the end of this semester, he would understand humility, one way or another. She stopped in front of the commander's podium, saluted crisply, and spoke in a voice that cut through the whispers and the morning chill. "I'm Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne. I will be running your combat conditioning and tactical training this semester. I expect your attention, your discipline, and your effort. Anything less will not be tolerated." The cadets exchanged skeptical glances. Some shrugged. One muttered under his breath, "Combat conditioning from her. Good luck." But Rebecca didn't need to respond. Her posture, straight and unyielding, and the way her eyes seemed to see through every facade, was a response in itself. After the brief introduction, she turned toward the field. "We start at 600 tomorrow. Bring your A game. I want no excuses. Dismissed." Cadets began to shuffle away, still whispering and laughing. One of the younger recruits lingered, unable to resist a jab. "Hey, Colonel, do you even remember what it's like to run a 2-mile sprint?" he called, voice loud enough for others to hear. Rebecca stopped mid-step and slowly turned, her gaze fixing on him. A silence fell over the group. She didn't yell, she didn't threaten. Instead, she smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if she were letting him keep his foolish confidence for just a little longer. "You'll find out soon enough," she said quietly. Then she walked away. That evening, the cadets gathered in the barracks, trading stories and speculation about the mysterious colonel. Some searched the archives, trying to find her record online, but there was little. They found mentions of commendations, high-level training programs, and elite combat instruction, but no sensational headlines. She wasn't seeking fame, and that made her all the more enigmatic. In the shadows of the training hall, the older instructors watched with a mixture of respect and curiosity. They knew her reputation. Rebecca Hawthorne wasn't just any officer. She had trained soldiers who went on to become some of the Army's best warriors, those who survived conflicts others didn't. The cadets had no idea that the person they were mocking had already sculpted greatness out of raw talent, and more often than not, out of arrogance like theirs. That night, while the cadets slept, or at least tried to, tossing and turning in anticipation of the next day, Rebecca walked the training grounds alone. Her boots crunched softly against the gravel. She reviewed her plans, every exercise, every challenge, every obstacle laid out with meticulous precision. She didn't need to sleep as long. Her body was conditioned, her mind sharp. Memories flickered across her mind. Early mornings with recruits who were too stubborn, exercises in snow and rain, nights spent pushing soldiers past exhaustion until they discovered strength they didn't know they had. Each memory was a lesson, each lesson a weapon she now carried into this new group of cadets. Somewhere in the dormitories, a young cadet murmured in his sleep, dreaming of victory and prestige, unaware of the storm that would descend upon him. That storm wasn't just physical, it was intellectual, psychological, and utterly relentless. The next morning, as the fog lifted from the training field, the cadets lined up again, boots shining, uniforms crisp. Their laughter from yesterday seemed distant now. They noticed her presence, calm and unwavering, watching them from the edge of the field like a hawk sizing up prey. One cadet, still unsure of himself, swallowed hard. Maybe she's serious. But even as doubt crept in, none of them realized just how serious she was, or how far she would push them to break their limits. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the field, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice cutting through the morning air. "Today, you will run the first endurance course. Keep up or fall behind." The cadets shifted nervously, adrenaline and fear mixing in equal measure. They had mocked her, laughed at her age, and assumed she was just another instructor. But by the time they crossed the finish line, every one of them would understand that appearances could be deceiving, and the first whispers of awe had already begun to form in the minds of those who had dared to laugh. Dawn broke over Fort Bragg with a chilling wind that bit through the cadets' uniforms. Mist still clung to the training fields, a gray blanket concealing the terrain ahead. The cadets assembled, teeth chattering, knees jittery, not just from the cold, but from the anticipation of what Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne had in store for them. "You're going to run a 5-mile endurance course," she announced, her voice calm but commanding. "Every obstacle on this course is designed to test not just your physical strength, but your mental resilience. Fail to finish, and you fail me. There will be no excuses, no complaints, no shortcuts." The cadets exchanged glances, some skeptical, some outright mocking. 5 miles, one scoffed. "We've done longer runs before, this is nothing." Rebecca's eyes scanned the line of recruits, landing on the tallest, most cocky cadet in the front row. He smirked back, sure he had already won the invisible battle of superiority. She didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough to silence the chatter, a quiet authority that demanded respect. The whistle blew. The cadets surged forward, their bodies propelled by adrenaline and overconfidence. Mud splashed beneath their boots as they thundered across the uneven terrain. The first obstacle, a high wall designed to test upper body strength, loomed ahead. Some cadets vaulted over with ease, others struggled, barely scraping the top. Rebecca moved with measured efficiency, not rushing, not straining, yet her form was flawless. She swung over the walls, balanced along narrow beams, and vaulted across trenches with the kind of controlled strength that made it seem effortless. Her eyes scanned constantly, assessing, calculating, memorizing each cadet's weaknesses, each misstep. The first mile was a test, and the cadets were already flagging. The cold wind seeped into their bones, sweat made their clothes cling uncomfortably, and the terrain seemed to stretch endlessly before them. Some began to stumble, panting, lungs burning. The laughter from yesterday was gone, replaced by gritted teeth and anxious glances. One cadet, the same who had mocked her age, fell face first into a mud puddle. Groaning, he scrambled up, embarrassed, looking over his shoulder at Rebecca. She didn't rush to help. Instead, she walked past him with steady steps, her eyes locking onto his for just a second, a silent message burning in that gaze: keep up, or learn your lesson the hard way. By the second mile, the course intensified. Narrow planks over deep mud pits demanded balance. Rope swings over shallow trenches demanded coordination and timing. Walls and climbing nets demanded strength and courage. One by one, the cadets began to drop behind, exhaustion taking its toll. Rebecca was always ahead, a figure of calm control amidst chaos. She paused briefly to offer advice, quick, sharp instructions that corrected form or timing, but she never slowed, never faltered. Her pace was relentless, yet seemingly effortless, a rhythm that the cadets could only marvel at and envy. By mile 3, the group had fractured. Cadets gasped for breath, muscles screaming, hearts pounding like drumbeats in a war march. Some collapsed briefly, only to push themselves up again, driven by pride, fear, and the realization that Rebecca Hawthorne wasn't someone who tolerated weakness. She was a predator in the field, and hesitation was fatal in her presence. The cadet who had mocked her at the start was now trailing far behind, mud-caked and trembling. I can't keep up," he panted, chest heaving. He glanced over his shoulder and saw her approaching, silent and imposing. With a fluid motion, she grabbed his arm, steadying him, and whispered, "You can. Push, or you fail yourself, not me." Her calm certainty struck him harder than the cold wind ever could. Swallowing his pride, he forced his legs to move, step by agonizing step, until he caught up with the group, though far from his earlier swagger. The final mile approached, a brutal incline, muddy, slippery, lined with jagged rocks and low-hanging ropes meant to test endurance and strategy. Cadets struggled to maintain their footing. Rebecca climbed effortlessly, her powerful legs propelling her upward, her arms swinging with the precision of a machine. One cadet stumbled, sliding halfway down the incline, fear in his eyes. Before he could fall completely, Rebecca's hand shot out like lightning, gripping his wrist, pulling him up, steadying him. She didn't lecture, she simply looked him in the eyes and said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't waste it." By the time the cadets reached the finish line, mud-streaked, bruised, and exhausted beyond comprehension, Rebecca had been waiting there, arms folded, watching every struggle. Their earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced with awe, disbelief, and something else, a growing respect that ran deeper than fear. The cadet who had mocked her gasped as he crossed, knees buckling. He looked at her and whispered, I didn't think I mean." Rebecca's smile was faint but unmistakable. "You doubted me. That was your first mistake." The other cadets, though exhausted, shared glances filled with new understanding. They had laughed at her age, at her presence, at what they assumed was weakness. They had been wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. Rebecca didn't celebrate, didn't chastise. She simply handed each cadet a bottle of water, her eyes sweeping over them with a sharp precision that felt almost like judgment. Then she spoke, her voice calm yet commanding attention. "This is just the beginning. Your strength alone will not see you through. Discipline, strategy, teamwork, and respect for the skill of those who came before you, these are what make a soldier. Fail to understand this, and you will fail in ways you can't even imagine." The cadet stood there, shivering, exhausted, and deeply unsettled. Her words weren't just advice, they were a promise, a warning, and a challenge all at once. As they made their way back to the barracks, a few cadets tried to joke again, but the laughter sounded hollow, uncertain. The energy of the morning had shifted. Rebecca Hawthorne was no ordinary instructor. She wasn't here to babysit or boost egos. She was here to push them to the edge, to see who could survive the pressure, and to ensure that no weakness went untested. That night, as the cadets attempted to sleep, their muscles screaming in protest and their minds replaying every grueling step of the course, they were haunted not by the physical exhaustion, but by the realization that they had underestimated her completely. Whispers passed through the dormitory. "Did you see how fast she moved? Did you notice how she never broke a sweat? She's not like any trainer we've ever had." And in the shadows, Rebecca stood outside the barracks, arms folded, watching the lights of the sleeping cadets. She had already begun cataloging their strengths and weaknesses, mentally preparing for the challenges ahead. She knew that tonight's test was only a taste of what was to come, and the real work, the transformation, was just beginning. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Tomorrow, the real test would begin, and the cadets would finally discover that the woman they had mocked was the very reason the Army's best warriors had survived and thrived. The next morning, a thin, gray fog hovered over the training grounds, muffling sounds and lending the world a surreal, otherworldly quality. The cadets assembled again, muscles sore, lungs still burning from the previous day's endurance course. Some shifted nervously, avoiding eye contact with Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne, as if fear alone could shield them from what was coming. Rebecca didn't speak at first. She simply walked slowly down the line, observing each cadet with the sharp, analytical gaze of a seasoned predator. Every twitch, every posture, every flicker of hesitation was catalogued in her mind. When she finally stopped, the silence was thick, almost tangible. "Today," she began, her voice cutting through the fog, "we begin hand-to-hand combat drills. These exercises will challenge not just your strength but your reflexes, focus, and ability to think under pressure. Mistakes are costly. Hesitation is fatal. Understand this." A murmur ran through the cadets. Some tried to hide their apprehension, but even the boldest couldn't mask the tension tightening in their chests. The first demonstration began with her alone in the center of the mat. She moved fluidly, almost impossibly fast, executing a series of strikes, blocks, and counters with flawless precision. Her movements were a symphony of control and power, each motion deliberate, each strike a lesson in physics, balance, and timing. The cadets watched, eyes wide, jaws slack. One cadet, trying to impress his peers, stepped forward to replicate her movements. He threw a punch with all the force he could muster, but before it even reached its target, Rebecca shifted, catching his wrist midair. In a single motion, she twisted his arm behind his back and used his momentum to guide him to the mat. He hit the floor with a thud, breath knocked out of him, and lay there staring at the ceiling, speechless. A silence fell over the group, heavy and charged. Whispers spread like wildfire. Did she just do that? She didn't even break a sweat. Who is she? Rebecca straightened, her eyes scanning the line of cadets, pausing on each one in turn. "You see, cadets," she said calmly, "combat is not about brute strength. It's about timing, precision, and control. Many of you rely on power alone. That will get you killed. I will teach you to anticipate, to read your opponent, to react before they even move." She then paired the cadets off, assigning each a partner. "You will practice these drills repeatedly. No mistakes. Every error is a lesson you will pay for." The exercise began, and chaos erupted almost immediately. Cadets rushed, overcommitted, flailed, and stumbled. Rebecca moved among them, correcting posture, adjusting grips, demonstrating once more the movements that had seemed almost magical the first time. Her presence was overwhelming, her reputation already casting a shadow over every hesitant step. One cadet, overly confident, attempted a bold maneuver, thinking he could anticipate her guidance. In a blink, she intercepted, his arm twisted, his momentum redirected, and he landed on the mat with a soft thump, stunned and frustrated. "Stop relying on ego," she said, voice low but sharp. "Control yourself or control will be taken from you. Do you understand?" The cadets nodded, though some trembled, not from fear alone, but from the dawning realization of how unprepared they truly were. Hours passed. Sweat-soaked uniforms clung to bodies, muscles burned, and fatigue gnawed at the edges of concentration. Yet Rebecca was relentless. She moved from pair to pair, correcting, instructing, pushing. Her attention never wavered, her focus unbroken. The cadets began to falter less, move with more precision, but the knowledge that she could, in an instant, expose every weakness kept their nerves taut. A few cadets tried to joke again, testing their courage, but every attempt was met with a look from her, a quiet, unyielding gaze that could freeze blood in veins. Even the bravest grew silent. By midday, Rebecca decided it was time for the final demonstration. She called forward the cockiest cadet, the one who had mocked her at the start. "Step up," she said. "Show me what you've learned." The cadet grinned, puffing up his chest. He had been practicing the techniques she had shown, convinced he could impress her. But as he approached, she remained perfectly still, her stance relaxed, yet impossibly alert. He threw the first punch, a flurry meant to overwhelm. Rebecca sidestepped effortlessly, catching his wrist mid-motion. With a swift twist and a controlled pivot, she brought him down, not violently but decisively. He hit the mat again, shock etched across his face. For the first time, he didn't laugh, he didn't smirk, he looked up at her wide-eyed. I didn't see that coming. That is the point, she said softly. You cannot predict what you cannot anticipate. That is why the best soldiers survive. They learn to read, adapt, and control the battlefield, not through strength but through skill. The other cadets absorbed the lesson in stunned silence. They had mocked her age, assuming weakness, only to realize they were in the presence of a master whose years had been honed into lethal precision. As the day drew to a close, the cadets collapsed onto the mats, exhausted, muscles trembling, minds racing. They whispered among themselves, reassessing everything they thought they knew about her. Did she really just? One murmured. She's amazing, another said. No one could move like that, a third added. Rebecca stood quietly at the edge of the mat, surveying the group. Sweat and grime covered her face, but her posture remained impeccable, her breathing controlled. She allowed herself a faint nod of approval. The cadets were beginning to grasp the first fragments of her lessons. The arrogance of youth was starting to crumble under the weight of experience. Yet she knew this was only the beginning. Today's drill had tested their reflexes and their willingness to learn, but the true challenges, those that would separate the weak from the capable, were yet to come. Tomorrow, she would push them further, beyond endurance, beyond skill, into the realm where fear, strategy, and discipline collided. As the cadets left the training hall, muscles sore and spirits humbled, a quiet tension followed them. Some were silent, others whispered apologies to themselves for ever doubting her. All were thinking about the next encounter, knowing that any slip-up, any hesitation, could undo the progress they had just made. Rebecca remained behind, wiping down the mats, inspecting the equipment and reviewing her mental notes on each cadet. Each weakness, each hesitation had been observed and catalogued. By the end of the semester, she would have no excuses, not from herself, not from them. She was here to mold warriors, and even the most arrogant would have no choice but to rise to the level of her expectations. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the training grounds. The cadets' laughter from yesterday had vanished entirely, replaced by a humbling realization. They were in the hands of someone who had trained the Army's best, someone whose experience and skill were unmatched. They had mocked her, doubted her, and underestimated her. But the lessons had only just begun. Night had fallen over Fort Bragg like a heavy curtain, swallowing the training grounds in darkness. The cadets huddled together near the barracks, their breath forming misty clouds in the cold night air. Their muscles ached, still sore from the hand-to-hand combat drills of the previous day, and a nervous energy buzzed through the group. They had started to understand Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne's skill, but the fear of what she might do next kept them on edge. Without warning, the barracks' floodlights flickered off. Darkness enveloped the cadets entirely. A voice, calm and controlled, cut through the black. Tonight you will navigate the forest. No lights, no guides. Only your wits, your instincts, and each other. Fail to reach the extraction point and the consequences are yours to bear. The cadets stiffened. Whispers ran through the group. Extraction point in the dark. This is insane. They can't seriously expect us to do this. Rebecca's figure appeared in the shadows, silent, her presence more commanding than ever. She didn't smile, didn't offer encouragement. She simply waited, letting the weight of the challenge settle on their shoulders. Move out, she ordered. The cadets ventured into the dark forest, flashlights in hand, their beams slicing thin paths through the dense foliage. Every snapping twig, every rustling leaf, made hearts pound faster. Panic began to creep in as they realized the terrain was unfamiliar, uneven, and treacherous. Rebecca moved alongside them, silent as a shadow. Unlike the cadets, she didn't need a flashlight. Her eyes were trained to see movement in the faintest light, to detect subtle shifts in terrain, and to anticipate danger before it arrived. She watched each cadet closely, noting who froze, who overreacted, and who adapted. An ambush simulation erupted suddenly, engineered by hidden instructors. Loud bangs echoed through the forest, and cadets instinctively dove for cover. One of the youngest froze entirely, eyes wide, paralyzed by fear. Rebecca appeared beside him like a phantom, hand gripping his shoulder, pulling him behind a tree. "Move," she hissed. "Fear is a weapon if you let it control you. Fight it or you're done." The cadet swallowed hard, shaking, and forced himself forward, but the panic didn't fully release. Rebecca guided him silently, her calm confidence a lifeline. Elsewhere, two cadets argued over which path to take, each insisting their plan was better. Their hesitation cost precious time, and the sounds of simulated gunfire seemed louder as the seconds ticked by. Rebecca intervened swiftly, her voice low but commanding, cutting through the darkness. "Decision-making is your responsibility. Arguing while under pressure is fatal. Move as one or fail as one." By the second hour, fatigue had set in. Legs burned, lungs gasped, and minds teetered on the edge of panic. Some cadets stumbled into thorny underbrush, tearing uniforms, scratching arms and faces. Yet Rebecca continued to move among them, her own movements effortless, precise, and unhurried, a stark contrast to the chaos around her. At one point, the group reached a narrow, muddy creek, water rushing cold and swift. Several cadets hesitated, unsure of footing. One slipped, arms flailing, teetering on the edge. Rebecca's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with unerring precision, pulling him to safety. "Every second counts," she whispered. "Indecision kills." Hours dragged on. Exhaustion made the simplest decisions feel impossible. Cadets whispered apologies to themselves, regretting the arrogance that had made them laugh at her age just days before. The reality of her skill and the consequences of failure pressed down on them with crushing weight. Finally, they reached a clearing, faint lights flickering in the distance, the extraction point. Relief washed over them, but it was tinged with humility, even fear. They had survived, but barely. The night had revealed their weaknesses, exposed their fears, and tested their ability to work together under extreme pressure. Rebecca stood at the edge of the clearing, arms folded, watching. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes held a glint of approval. She had pushed them to their limits and observed how each cadet responded under stress, fear, and uncertainty. "You survived," she said quietly, voice carrying across the clearing. "But surviving is not the same as succeeding. Today was about observation, discipline, and adaptability. Remember this. The battlefield will show no mercy, and hesitation will be punished. The strongest survive not because they are fearless, but because they are prepared." The cadets stared at her, a mixture of awe, exhaustion, and something else, recognition. The woman they had mocked, the one they had assumed was past her prime, had led them through an exercise that none of them had imagined surviving. They had underestimated her again, and again she had proven them wrong. One cadet, still trembling, dared to speak. "Colonel, how did you move like that, in the dark like a shadow?" Rebecca's gaze swept over the group. "Experience, observation, control. You will learn these things if you survive my training. If not, you will remember the lesson the hard way." As the cadets trudged back to the barracks, bruised, scratched, and soaked from the creek crossing, their thoughts were heavy. They had laughed at her age, dismissed her authority, and assumed weakness, but tonight had stripped away all illusions. They had glimpsed the precision, strength, and tactical brilliance that had earned her the reputation of training the Army's best warriors. And yet, even as they rested, a gnawing realization remained. Tonight's test had been just one of many. The real challenges, the ones that would push them beyond endurance, beyond skill, into fear itself, were yet to come. Outside in the quiet shadows of the forest, Rebecca Hawthorne paused. Her breathing was controlled calm. She watched the cadets disappear toward the barracks, mentally cataloging every moment, every hesitation, every decision. Each weakness had been observed, each strength noted. This night was not about punishment. It was about revelation. She had shown them the consequences of fear, the importance of quick decision-making, and the necessity of teamwork under pressure. But she knew the cadets had only begun to understand the magnitude of what they were facing. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Rebecca allowed herself a faint smile. Tomorrow, the cadets would face another test, one that would further separate the unprepared from those who could rise to the challenge. The night had revealed their vulnerability, but the next exercise would demand resilience, skill, and the ability to endure the unforgiving scrutiny of a master. The morning sun pierced through the barracks windows, casting sharp beams across the wooden floors and illuminating the cadets' weary faces. The events of the night before still clung to them, the foggy forest, the creek, the simulated ambushes. Every muscle ached, every thought lingered on the relentless presence of Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne. Their initial arrogance had been shattered, replaced by a mixture of awe, exhaustion, and unease. Inside the training hall, a bulletin board had been newly adorned with photos, commendations, and classified notices. Whispers rippled through the cadets as they approached. The top photo showed a younger Rebecca, in full combat gear, standing beside a group of soldiers whose faces were now legendary. Special Forces operators, Green Berets, and decorated combat veterans. Medals, ribbons, and commendations were pinned neatly along the edges. One cadet, still rubbing the soreness from his shoulder, muttered, "Wait, these guys. These are some of the Army's best." Another nodded, jaw slack, and she trained them, all of them. The murmurs grew louder, spreading through the group like wildfire. One by one, the cadets scanned the documentation, military awards, special commendations, tactical training records, and classified programs that were rarely spoken of, even among the senior instructors. Rebecca Hawthorne's name appeared repeatedly, linked to programs that had produced elite warriors, soldiers who survived operations others didn't. A young cadet, barely able to process what he was seeing, whispered, "So, she trained them." His voice shook. "The ones we've heard stories about, she trained them." A sense of awe began to wash over the room, mingling with the lingering fear from the night's exercises. The cadets realized the laughter and mocking that had greeted her arrival was not only foolish, it was almost disrespectful. They had underestimated her by decades, by experience, and by skill. Rebecca entered the hall silently, as she always did, her presence immediately commanding attention. Her gaze swept over the cadets, calm and steady, as if weighing the very essence of their souls. No one dared speak until she did. "You've seen what I have achieved," she said softly, her voice carrying an almost imperceptible weight. "These were not mere exercises. These were soldiers like you who needed guidance, discipline, and the will to survive. My work has always been to extract the potential that others overlook, to forge warriors from those who are willing to endure." The cadets stared, some unable to comprehend the depth of her words. She had not simply trained soldiers, she had molded legends, men who went into the most dangerous environments the world could offer and returned alive because of the foundation she had built. One cadet, voice barely above a whisper, asked, "But why us? Why teach us? We're just cadets." Rebecca's eyes softened slightly, though her demeanor remained firm. "Because potential exists in everyone. You think you are merely students, but in this training, you will learn lessons that some never understand until it is too late. You are young, yes. You are inexperienced, yes. But you are capable, and it is my job to ensure you realize it before the world teaches you in ways that leave no margin for error." The cadets shifted uncomfortably, some hanging their heads, others trying to meet her gaze. They were beginning to understand the scale of what they were facing. Her age was no indicator of weakness. It was proof of experience, resilience, and mastery. One cadet, the same who had mocked her at the very start, swallowed hard. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by a reluctant reverence. I didn't realize you were," his words faltered. "We were wrong about everything." Rebecca's expression was unreadable, yet there was a faint acknowledgement of his admission. "Yes, you were wrong, but admitting that is the first step to becoming stronger. Pride can kill more soldiers than any weapon ever will." As she spoke, another cadet, one who had been quietly observing, finally found the courage to ask, "Colonel, how did you survive so many challenges, train so many elite soldiers?" Her gaze swept over the group, thoughtful, almost nostalgic. "Experience, discipline, and the understanding that the world is unforgiving. Every soldier I trained faced obstacles, fear, exhaustion, and sometimes death. The work I did was never about glory, it was about survival. Every lesson, every drill, every challenge was designed to push limits, reveal weaknesses, and build strength. And now, it is your turn." A tense silence filled the room as the cadets processed the gravity of her words. They had mocked her, doubted her, assumed weakness, and now they were confronted with the reality. She was a living legend, a woman whose experience and skill dwarfed anything they could imagine. The arrogance that had fueled their laughter was replaced by humility, awe, and a gnawing sense of inadequacy. Rebecca stepped closer to the bulletin board, pointing at a photograph of a group of soldiers mid-training, sweat and mud caked to their faces, determination burning in their eyes. "These soldiers were once like you, full of doubt, full of arrogance, untested. I pushed them to the edge, forced them to confront fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty, and they survived. They became the best because they learned to listen, to observe, to act decisively under pressure. That is what I demand of you as well." The cadets absorbed the lesson in stunned silence. Every detail of her past, every commendation, every story added weight to her presence. They had arrived at this point thinking she was simply an instructor, an older officer who might have some wisdom to share. Now they realized she was a force of nature, a living testament to what discipline, skill, and experience could achieve. A younger cadet, voice shaking, finally spoke, "Colonel, we underestimated you. We thought your age meant we don't know weakness. But now," he trailed off, eyes wide. "Yes," Rebecca said quietly, her voice calm, firm. "You thought wrong, and that mistake could have cost you dearly. Never underestimate anyone or anything based on appearances. Lessons like that are priceless in life and lethal on the battlefield." The weight of her words settled heavily over the cadets. They had faced challenges, pushed past physical exhaustion, and endured the night exercise, but nothing had hit them as profoundly as this revelation. Her past was not a tale. It was a living, breathing testament to mastery, endurance, and resilience. Rebecca took a step back, allowing her presence to dominate the room without a word. The cadets, for the first time, were silent in a way that spoke louder than words. They were listening, truly listening, to someone who had earned every ounce of respect they now reluctantly granted her. One cadet whispered to another, almost audibly, She trained the best soldiers, the guys we read about in manuals, and we laughed at her." Rebecca's gaze swept over them once more, calm and piercing. "You have seen but a fraction of my work. You have endured exercises designed to test your physical limits, your focus, and your fear. And yet you are still at the beginning. Every lesson I give, every challenge I present will shape you, but only if you are willing to learn, to adapt, and to respect the process. Otherwise, you will fail, and in life, failure can be final." The cadets nodded, some quietly, some with shaky hands gripping their uniforms. Fear, awe, and respect swirled in the air like a tangible force. They had laughed at her arrival. They had doubted her skill. They had underestimated her because of age and appearance. And now the truth had been revealed. She was a master of her craft, a woman whose experience had shaped warriors capable of surviving what most could not. As they filed out of the training hall, quiet and reflective, the cadets carried with them a profound realization. The lessons were no longer hypothetical, no longer drills. They were a blueprint for survival, for skill, and for mastery. Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne had earned their respect not through words, but through the undeniable proof of her past, her presence, and the relentless standards she imposed. Outside, the morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and dew. The cadets walked back to the barracks, muscles sore, minds racing, and hearts heavy with the weight of revelation. The laughter, arrogance, and doubt that had greeted her arrival were gone, replaced by something stronger, a recognition that they were standing in the shadow of greatness, and that their journey had only just begun. The dawn was pale, barely cutting through the mist that clung to the Fort Bragg training grounds. The cadets assembled, weary from the previous night's revelations and mentally exhausted from the hand-to-hand combat drills. They had seen Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne's mastery, felt the sting of failure, and now carried the weight of her legendary reputation. Today, she told them, they would face a battlefield simulation, a test of endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower. It was one thing to crawl through mud and dodge simulated attacks, but this would test their ability to lead, to follow, and to survive under relentless stress. Rebecca's eyes swept across the line of cadets. This exercise will expose weaknesses you did not know existed. Your mental limits will be tested, your teamwork scrutinized, and your resolve questioned. Fail, and you will learn the cost of hesitation. The cadets exchanged nervous glances. They had survived her drills, endured the night exercise, and witnessed her unmatched skill, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this. The simulation began with a sudden blast, a deafening shock that rattled the nerves of the most confident cadets. Smoke filled the air as alarms blared, and the forested training ground transformed into a war zone of fog, confusion, and unseen threats. Rebecca moved among them, a silent observer and occasional guide. She did not intervene unless absolutely necessary, allowing the chaos to expose their fears, indecision, and lack of cohesion. Every misstep, every hesitation was a lesson in survival. One squad froze at a crossroads, arguing over which path to take. The noise, the simulated explosions, and the disorienting fog made it impossible to discern the correct route without leadership and quick decision-making. Rebecca appeared suddenly, a phantom in the smoke, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Indecision is fatal," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Decide, act, lead, or die in hesitation." The cadets obeyed, shaking but moving. The lesson was clear: hesitation would not be tolerated. As they moved deeper into the simulation, obstacles grew more complex. Traps mimicked enemy ambushes, and decoy threats tested their ability to stay focused under stress. One cadet panicked, misreading a simulated gunshot as a real threat, and stumbled, nearly falling into a mud pit. Rebecca's hand shot out, steadying him, and with a whisper she said, "Calm your mind. Panic is the enemy within." By the third hour, exhaustion set in. Cadets were crawling through mud, dragging logs to simulate heavy equipment, and running over uneven terrain while carrying heavy packs. Every step was a test of endurance, every decision a measure of their mental fortitude. One cadet, the one who had mocked her at the start of training, was struggling the most. His earlier confidence had been replaced with dread. His legs were burning, his lungs screaming for air, and his mind was on the verge of surrender. Yet he pressed on, driven by the memory of her gaze, the calm, piercing eyes that refused to let weakness pass unnoticed. Rebecca watched silently, cataloging each cadet's strengths and weaknesses. She had trained soldiers in far harsher conditions, and she knew how to push them just to the edge of collapse, enough to test resolve, not to destroy. The real lesson lay in whether they could find the strength to rise when every instinct begged them to fall. Suddenly, a loud simulated explosion erupted nearby, and a part of the squad was wounded in the exercise. Panic erupted immediately. Cadets shouted, argued over who should go first, and some froze entirely. Rebecca moved swiftly, her presence slicing through the chaos. "Focus," she barked. Every life counts. Lead, communicate, execute. Her voice cut through the panic like steel. Slowly, the cadets began to coordinate. They moved as a team, dragging the simulated wounded to safety, covering each other's movements and thinking through the chaos. The transformation was visible, arrogance and inexperience replaced with cautious precision, fear tempered by strategy. Hours dragged on. The simulation demanded not just endurance but mental acuity. The cadets had to navigate the fog, manage resources, make split-second decisions, and trust each other implicitly. Every error had consequences. Every hesitation was punished by the unforgiving exercise. One by one, the cadets faced moments that would have broken lesser soldiers. They crawled through mud pits while under simulated fire, scaled obstacles with trembling arms, and carried teammates over difficult terrain, learning the cost of teamwork and trust in a way that no classroom lecture could impart. Rebecca remained a constant presence, guiding with a whisper here, a corrective gesture there. She never did the work for them. She allowed them to fail, recover, and adapt. By the end of the exercise, every cadet had been tested to their absolute limit, pushed to the edge of physical and mental exhaustion. As the final simulated enemy threat was neutralized, the cadets gathered, soaked in sweat and mud, faces streaked with grime and exhaustion. They had survived barely. The silence was heavy, each cadet reflecting on the lessons learned under fire. Rebecca stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the group. Today you have faced not just physical obstacles, but the limitations of your mind and spirit. Some of you failed to lead, some of you faltered in fear, and some of you discovered strength you didn't know existed. This is what real soldiers endure. This is what you must become capable of. The cadets stared at her, still gasping for air, minds racing. The weight of the exercise had stripped away all pretense and ego. They had laughed at her age, underestimated her skill, and doubted her ability. But now, standing in the aftermath of a simulation designed to test their very limits, they understood the truth. Rebecca Hawthorne was unmatched, and the standard she demanded was absolute. One cadet, trembling and barely able to stand, whispered, She's trained the best warriors, and we just lived through her test. We barely survived." Rebecca's eyes softened just slightly, acknowledging the truth of the statement. Barely surviving is not enough. Today was a lesson in endurance, adaptability, and teamwork. But tomorrow, you will be tested again. This time, not just your bodies, but your ability to think, to strategize, and to act decisively will be the difference between success and failure. As the cadets began to retreat to the barracks, muscles trembling, minds racing, a sense of quiet respect settled over them. Fear and awe mingled in equal measure, and for the first time, they began to understand what it truly meant to be under the guidance of someone who had trained the Army's best soldiers. Outside, the fog lingered over the training grounds, a silent witness to the transformation that had begun. Rebecca Hawthorne stood alone, surveying the terrain, cataloging every hesitation, every display of courage, and every lesson learned. Tomorrow's challenges would be even harsher, but she knew her cadets had begun the journey from inexperience toward the edge of greatness. The air was thick with anticipation as the cadets assembled at the edge of the training grounds. Today was the final exercise, the culmination of everything Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne had taught them. Every obstacle, every drill, every sleepless night, and every moment of fear had led to this. The field ahead was unlike any they had faced, a vast, rugged terrain designed to challenge endurance, strategy, teamwork, and mental fortitude simultaneously. Smoke billowed from simulated fires, dense fog hung low, and jagged obstacles clawed at the sky like silent sentinels. The layout was disorienting, deliberately designed to test navigation, decision-making, and leadership under extreme pressure. Rebecca's figure appeared at the front, calm, poised, commanding every eye in the line. This is the ultimate test. Every skill you have learned, every ounce of strength, every decision-making ability you possess will be tested. Fail, and you fail the team. Fail repeatedly and you will fail yourselves. There are no second chances. A hush fell over the cadets. Their muscles ached, their minds were raw from past exercises, yet something in her presence sparked a quiet fire. They had survived, learned, and adapted under her guidance, and now the final challenge loomed. The simulation began with a loud, deafening explosion, sending smoke and confusion into the air. The cadets scattered into teams, immediately forced to make split-second decisions. Visibility was near zero. The terrain was treacherous. Panic threatened to take hold, but Rebecca's presence, calm and steady, reminded them of the discipline she had instilled. One team encountered a simulated enemy in a narrow corridor of fog. Reflexes and coordination were tested as cadets dodged traps, navigated pitfalls, and executed maneuvers with precision. One cadet stumbled, nearly triggering a mine, but Rebecca's hand shot out like lightning, steadying him and whispering, "Focus, control, execute." Elsewhere, another squad struggled with leadership. Confusion threatened to splinter their group. Decisions were slow, arguments arose. Rebecca appeared silently, placing a hand on the shoulder of the hesitant leader. "Lead with clarity. Hesitation will cost you." The cadets pressed forward, navigating rope bridges, scaling walls, crawling under wire, and moving through deep mud pits. Every obstacle demanded not only physical strength, but the ability to think and adapt on the fly. Missteps were harshly punished by simulated hazards, reinforcing lessons learned from the battlefield simulations. Hours passed and exhaustion was nearly absolute. The fog, smoke, and dim lighting warped their senses. Cadets were covered in mud, blood from small scrapes, and sweat. Fear gnawed at their resolve. Yet Rebecca's eyes missed nothing. Every hesitation, every display of courage, every misstep catalogued in her mind. A crucial moment arrived when a cadet froze under pressure, facing a simulated hostage scenario. The wrong move could trigger failure. Heart racing, he recalled Rebecca's lessons from the night exercise and the battlefield simulation. Stay calm, assess, communicate, act decisively. He gave clear orders to his team, maneuvered to secure the hostage, and neutralize the threat. Rebecca watched from the shadows, her expression unreadable. She nodded subtly. The cadet had internalized the lessons, but the test was far from over. As the simulation continued, fatigue and fear began to fracture the teams. Miscommunication caused minor failures, some cadets doubted themselves, and the weight of expectation threatened to crush resolve. One cadet, trembling from exhaustion, whispered to a teammate, "I can't, I'm too tired." Rebecca appeared instantly, placing a hand firmly on his shoulder. "You can. Exhaustion is temporary. Weakness is a choice. Push forward or fall behind." Her words carried the authority of someone who had seen the worst of war, survived, and thrived. The cadet nodded, determination igniting despite the pain, and pressed on. The final phase of the exercise approached, a complex maze of high walls, deep trenches, and narrow ledges. Teams had to navigate with both speed and precision, ensuring no cadet was left behind while under simulated enemy fire. Mistakes would separate the strong from the weak. Rebecca moved among them silently, correcting posture, advising on movement, and observing how leadership emerged under pressure. She had designed this scenario to test every facet of their training: endurance, skill, teamwork, and mental fortitude. One squad encountered a trap, a narrow ledge over a simulated pit. One cadet froze, fear paralyzing him. A teammate hesitated, unsure how to help without risking himself. Rebecca appeared in an instant, positioning herself to guide the cadet across, whispering concise, precise instructions. Slowly, deliberately, they crossed, each step a lesson in courage and trust. As the cadets neared the extraction point, fatigue and tension reached their peak. Mud-streaked faces, sweat-soaked hair, and trembling limbs betrayed the struggle it had taken to get this far. Yet the final push was the most dangerous, an obstacle designed to test every lesson Rebecca had imparted: endurance, adaptability, leadership, and nerve under pressure. The cadets scrambled over walls, crawled through mud, and dodged simulated hazards. Panic threatened to resurface, but the lessons of the past week, the night exercise, the hand-to-hand combat, the battlefield simulations, echoed in their minds. They remembered Rebecca's words, her gaze, and the legacy she embodied. Finally, the last obstacle loomed, a sheer wall, slick with mud, nearly vertical. Cadets were exhausted, trembling, and afraid. One by one, Rebecca guided them, her presence steady, calm, and unwavering. One step at a time. Focus. You are stronger than you believe. With sweat streaming down their faces and shaking muscles screaming in protest, each cadet scaled the wall. The one who had mocked her at the start was last, trembling but determined. With Rebecca's guiding hand, he pulled himself over, landing hard but victorious. He looked up at her, awe and disbelief etched into his mud-streaked face. Rebecca surveyed the group, silent for a moment, letting the weight of accomplishment settle. Every cadet had been tested to their limit, every fear confronted, every lesson applied under extreme conditions. "You have survived the ultimate test," she said finally, voice calm but resonant. "Not everyone makes it this far. Not everyone has the courage, the skill, or the resolve. But those who endure, those who rise to the challenge, learn to become warriors. Today, you have faced your limits, and you have discovered that strength lies not just in muscle, but in courage, discipline, and unity." The cadets, mud-soaked, exhausted, and trembling, absorbed her words. They had laughed, doubted, and underestimated her. They had endured her relentless training, faced fear, exhaustion, and chaos, and now they understood the full measure of her skill and the depth of her lessons. Outside, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over the training grounds. Rebecca Hawthorne stood at the center, silent, commanding, a figure of authority, mastery, and unyielding strength. The cadets looked to her, no longer with doubt, no longer with arrogance, but with a mixture of awe, respect, and the hard-earned understanding that she had truly transformed them. The morning air was crisp and bright, a sharp contrast to the fog, mud, and chaos of the previous weeks. The cadets gathered on the training grounds, their uniforms battered, faces streaked with dirt and sweat, muscles still sore from the relentless exercises. But something in their posture had shifted. They carried themselves differently now, with a quiet confidence tempered by the lessons of experience and the weight of Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne's guidance. Rebecca stood at the front, a tall, commanding figure, calm and unyielding. Her eyes swept over the cadets, noting every detail, the smallest adjustment in posture, the tension in a shoulder, the way each person held themselves after weeks of grueling training. This final day was not a test of endurance or skill alone. It was a test of transformation, of character forged under fire. "Today," she said, her voice steady and resonant, "you will demonstrate everything you have learned. Your ability to adapt, to think, to act decisively, and to lead will be tested in one final simulation. This is not just about survival. This is about proving that you can rise to the standard I have set." The cadets nodded, some swallowing hard, others exchanging glances of determination. The fear that had gripped them on day one had been replaced by a fierce resolve. They had seen what Rebecca could do. They had faced their own limitations and survived. Now it was time to show what they were capable of. The simulation began with a sudden blast, fog rolling across the grounds as simulated explosions shattered the quiet. Cadets moved as teams, coordinating, communicating, and executing strategies with a precision that would have been impossible just days before. Every obstacle, every challenge, every unexpected variable was met with focus and decisiveness. Rebecca observed, walking among them like a shadow, occasionally stepping in to correct posture or give a whispered instruction. She did not interfere unnecessarily. The lesson was not in her intervention, but in how the cadets applied what they had learned under extreme pressure. A squad encountered a simulated hostage scenario, much like the one in the battlefield simulation. This time, the cadets approached with calm precision. Decisions were made quickly, plans executed flawlessly. One cadet directed movements, another provided cover, while a third neutralized the enemy threat. The operation was completed efficiently, without hesitation or panic, a testament to the discipline Rebecca had instilled. Elsewhere, teams navigated treacherous terrain, crawling under wire, scaling walls, and crossing muddy pits. Coordination was seamless. Each cadet moved with awareness of their teammates, anticipating needs and covering gaps. Mistakes were minimal, and when they occurred, they were corrected immediately through communication and teamwork. Hours into the exercise, the final obstacle loomed, a massive wall, slick with mud, nearly vertical. In previous weeks, this had broken cadets physically and mentally. Today, the squads approached methodically, supporting each other, offering hands and words of encouragement. The cadet who had mocked Rebecca on the first day led the final ascent, guiding teammates with the confidence and calm she had instilled in him. As the last cadet reached the top, the group stood together on the elevated platform, mud-streaked, exhausted but victorious. For the first time, they truly understood the weight of their transformation. They were no longer uncertain, hesitant recruits. They were soldiers forged under the relentless eye of a master. Rebecca stepped forward, her presence commanding absolute attention. She scanned the group, noting the changes not just in posture, but in demeanor, in the way they carried themselves after weeks of intense training. Her expression softened, a faint acknowledgement of pride in the work she had accomplished. "You have endured," she said, voice carrying over the grounds. "You have faced fear, exhaustion, and doubt. You have learned to act decisively, to lead, and to trust your instincts. Most importantly, you have learned that strength is not measured by age, size, or appearances. It is measured by discipline, courage, and the will to persevere." The cadets stood silent, absorbing the weight of her words. The laughter and doubt that had greeted her arrival were long gone, replaced by quiet reverence and an unspoken acknowledgement of the lessons they had learned. One cadet, voice trembling with emotion, finally spoke. "Colonel, we underestimated you, every single one of us. We thought you were just older, that you couldn't, that you," his words faltered, overwhelmed by the enormity of realization. Rebecca's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "Yes, you underestimated me, and that is the point. Underestimation is a weakness you cannot afford in the field. Today you see clearly. Today you have proven yourselves not to me but to yourselves. That is what true warriors do. They rise even when they are pushed to the edge." Another cadet stepped forward, mud streaked across his face, muscles shaking. We can't thank you enough, ma'am. We've learned more in these weeks than we ever thought possible." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Gratitude is not required. Action, discipline, and courage are. You have learned what it takes to survive, to lead, and to endure. Carry these lessons with you. Remember them, apply them, and never forget that the strength you see in yourselves today was always there. You only needed someone to help you realize it." The cadets exchanged glances, nodding, some with tears streaking down dirt-streaked faces. They had faced the ultimate test and emerged transformed. The arrogance, fear, and doubt that had defined them at the beginning of training had been stripped away, replaced by discipline, skill, and respect, for themselves, for each other, and for the woman who had guided them through fire. Rebecca stepped back, surveying the field. The simulation was complete. The cadets had proven their growth, and the final lesson had been delivered. Her work here was done, not because the cadets had reached perfection, but because they had discovered their own potential, their own resilience, and their capacity to rise above fear and doubt. As the cadets filed past her, she offered a final nod, acknowledgement without ceremony. They had earned it through sweat, endurance, and courage. No applause, no accolades, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had faced the crucible and emerged stronger. The sun rose higher, casting light across the training grounds, illuminating mud-streaked uniforms and tired, determined faces. The cadets stood taller, moved with more confidence, and carried a quiet strength that had not existed before. The transformation was complete, not just in skill but in spirit. And as the final moments of training drew to a close, the cadets understood what they had truly gained: the knowledge that greatness is forged through discipline, courage, and relentless effort. They had laughed at her age, doubted her skill, and underestimated her power. Now they would carry the lessons of Colonel Rebecca Hawthorne with them for the rest of their lives.